So we're continuing our journey into the world of Asav and Edom. Last time was really just the introduction. We still haven't actually answered any of the big questions from last time. And we had 3 questions, if you remember. One was, who is Edom today exactly? We saw who Edom was in the past, the original Edom, Asav. But who is Edom today, and how did we get to this point? That's really a huge question. At which point did Edom become associated with the Roman Empire? What's the connection? Edom is in Israel, where Israel and Jordan is today. How did that become the Roman Empire, or the Western world, or the Christian world? So we have to address that as well. And finally, what is the role of Edom in the end of days? Because that's really important as well. What should we expect to see in the coming months and years if we are truly in that era, in the pre-Messianic era? So what should we expect to see? So we want to answer all those questions. Maybe we won't finish it all today. Probably we'll need a part 3. A quick clarification. I noticed a number of comments on the video on YouTube. This is a classic question, which is, it seems like Asav is a victim and Yakov is the bad guy. That Yakov is the trickster in the story. So people say things like, oh, what kind of brother wouldn't give some lentil stew to his own blood, his own flesh and blood? What kind of bad brother was Yakov that he would do such a thing? And that he tricked him out of his birthright. Now, we have to remember, this should have been made clear last time, that story is set at following Abraham's funeral. Abraham passes away. After the funeral, Yakov is cooking this red lentil stew, which is the traditional mourner's meal. He's taking care of his family, and Asav is nowhere to be seen. So the context of that story is Asav misses his grandfather's funeral. He's out sinning. He's out all night. He comes in the morning. He's tired, and he wants to eat. And he doesn't even know what's going on in the family. He doesn't care about his grandfather, doesn't care about the parents, doesn't care about the mourners, and is willing to give up his own birthright for some lentil stew. So that's presenting us with the character of Asav. And the Torah clearly says that he spurned ve'yavezet bechorah, that he specifically didn't want it. He spurned his own birthright. So Yaakov recognized that Asav doesn't have what it takes, that Asav has fallen off the path, that he's not going to be able to fulfill his divine mission. He doesn't care about the covenant. He doesn't care about passing on what Abraham started. And Yaakov takes that mission upon himself. He takes the birthright upon himself. That's really the context of that story. And it's really clear who is the good guy and who's the not so good guy. And later, the prophet Malachi makes that explicit. Because the prophet Malachi said, God says, Na'um Hashem ve'ohevet Yakov ve'et Esav saneti. I loved Yaakov and I despised Asav. The prophet Malachi quotes God, Na'um Hashem, as saying this. So it's pretty clear who is good and bad here. God says, I loved Yaakov. He was devoted to godliness and to Torah and to spirituality and to the covenant. And Asav was not. Asav spurned his birthright. Asav went down a wicked path. He went to Har Seir, if you remember, and all of that demonology that Seir is associated with. And God specifically says, I despised Asav's wicked ways. Now, that said, Asav is not all bad. There's actually a lot of good in Asav, and that's where we ended off last time, when Asav passed away, or when Asav was killed, really. When Yakov died, and Asav came to block the funeral, and then Hushim ben Dan, the son of Dan, essentially decapitated Asav, and Asav's head rolled into Me'arat HaMachpelah. So Asav's head was buried with the patriarchs, in the cave of the patriarchs, with Avram, Yitzhak, Yaakov, and with Sarah and Rivka and Leah, and Adam and Eve, because there was 4 couples, if you remember, were buried at the cave of the patriarchs. That's why it's also called Kiryat Arba, the place of the 4, because 4 couples were buried there. Adam and Eve originally, and because Adam and Eve were buried there, Abraham buried Sarah there, and then he was buried there, and then Yitzhak and Rivka, and then Leah and Yaakov, and Asav's head. And the idea is that Asav's head was worthy. There is a part of Asav that is holy, that is good, that does deserve to be buried alongside the patriarchs in this holy place. But the body, the sinful body, had to be kept out, but the good part of him was buried with the patriarchs. And that's symbolic of the good part of Edom. The part of Edom that did good for the world, that doesn't just bring sin and war and bloodshed and suffering and slavery and colonialism and all of that, but that also helped to civilize the world and spread goodness and godliness and monotheism and does all this charity work. Right? And you see that there's all these Christian groups that are doing good work around the world, taking care of widows and orphans and building schools and all of that. Christians and Jews are the two that are the most concerned about tikkun olam, about making the world a better place, of going all over the world, rectifying the world, improving conditions for the world. Israel's always first when there's a natural disaster somewhere, sending aid, sending field hospitals, sending medics, sending supplies. And other Jewish organizations are always there helping, and Christian ones. Though I think those are the two that are always that have this understanding that we want to fix the world and bring about the final redemption, restore a kingdom of heaven on earth. So the good part of Asav is the part that's concerned with that. It's the part that's not the oppressor. It's not the violent part. It's the loving part. It's not the anti-Semitic part. It's the philo-Semitic part. Philo-Semitism being those who love the Jews and help the Jews and work together with the Jews. So that's the head of Asav, the good part, right? That's the part of the Christian Western world that is good, and that the Jewish people actually have to work together with Asav, because that was God's plan. If you remember, God's original plan was that Yakov and Asav should work together. Asav was blessed with physical strength. He was born fully formed, muscular, like a man. He was given physical strength. And Yakov was given more spiritual strength. And together they were supposed to rectify the world. Each one had his own talents. Asav, unfortunately, didn't do what he was supposed to. But some of his descendants did. The good part of Asav is still there, and the original goal was for the house of Israel and the house of Asav to work together. And we see that throughout history in the Jewish and Christian relationship. If you remember, we quoted this many times. The Rambam says, on the one hand, Christianity is, for the Jews, a false religion. But on the other hand, Christianity played an important role, the Rambam says, in spreading monotheism to the whole world. They spread basic Torah fundamentals, to 10 Commandments, the knowledge of God, knowledge of the idea of a messianic age, of a redemption, of striving towards a final redemption, making the world a better place. The Rambam says Christians helped to spread that internationally. We couldn't have done it alone. They did most of the work, actually, that the Christian world did, through their very active missionary activity. Yes? Yeah.
Their God has no face. They don't have saints to pray to.
That's right.
So shouldn't be Muslim more close to...
Yeah, the Rambam says the Muslims also played a part in that. But actually, at the core, Judaism is a lot more similar to Christianity, or Christianity, I should say, is a lot more similar to Judaism than Islam. Because Muslims, first of all, wrote their own text. Muslims do not study the Torah or Tanakh. They have the Quran, which is their own text, rewrote the story, it's different. Christians, on the other hand, have the same Tanakh that we do. They believe in the same core, what they call the Old Testament. So we actually have the same set of scriptures. If you walk into a mosque, you won't find a Tanakh. But if you walk into any church, you'll find an Old Testament. You'll find a Tanakh. They refer to the people in the same, they refer to God using the same names. Muslims don't. Muslims have different names for God. Right? They refer to God as Allah, as different. Christians and Jews refer to God using the exact same names. Yes, they added the whole Jesus thing, but aside from that, it's the same terminology. A lot of our core prayers are the same. Right? Christian prayers are also based on Tehillim. They sing psalms. Muslims don't sing psalms. Right? Jews and Christians are the two groups that pray with psalms, with Tehillim. Muslims don't. They have their own thing. So in many different ways, Christianity and Judaism are a lot more similar. I mentioned before, even the Kedusha that we say in our prayers every day, multiple times a day, right? The Kedusha and the Amidah, Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. Christians have that too. It's called the Sanctus prayer, and they say the same thing, just in Latin. They say Sanctus, Sanctus, Sanctus. They say the same thing. So we have actually a lot of the same core prayers, a lot of the similar practices, same core Tanakh, whereas Islam isn't. We're more similar to Islam in the sense that Muslims avoid pork, and pray multiple times a day and are strict monotheists without intermediaries. Yeah, and that they have circumcision, they have shechita similar to ours. Yes, in those ways we're similar. Ultimately, Christians and Jews agree on the core scriptures. Right. We agree and believe that Tanakh is divine. Muslims do not believe that. They have their own book. They have the Quran, and they believe the Tanakh is false, essentially. And they've rewritten a lot of those stories. So Jews and Christians agree on the entire early history, the whole story from Adam through to really as far as Jesus, right? We agree on that whole backstory. It's only from Jesus onwards that we have now a split. And that's it. And then the Christians will view the Old Testament through the eyes of the New Testament, and we will view the Tanakh through the eyes of Talmud, Midrash, Kabbalah, but we have the same core. So yeah, we have a lot more core values in common with Christians than with Muslims. So as we shall see, we were meant to come together eventually. Some people say that we're witnessing that today, where in the Western world there is all of this, there's all this good from the world of Edom that's actually supporting Israel, and that together we're going to be able to bring about the redemption. And the prophet Ovadiah, which we're going to get to, Ovadiah was an Edomite convert. He came from Edom and converted to Judaism, and he gives a prophecy, 21 verses, shortest book in Tanakh, all about Edom's role in the end of days. So we'll come back to that, and it's a critical role. So Edom does have an important role to play at the end of days, and some see that happening now, especially in the last few weeks, and the coming weeks ahead with Donald Trump. So far, his cabinet picks have been all either Jewish or very pro-Israel, pro-everything, right? Pro-IDF, even pro-settlements. So it looks like it's a very good thing for Israel. And we want to focus on that as well. What is Donald Trump's role in all of this? Could he be the good part of Edom that can help Israel achieve its goals, essentially, and bring about the final redemption, which is where we're heading? And the midrash actually says that Asav, that Edom, will help Israel come back to their holy land and restore the crown of Israel. It's an interesting midrash. It's actually a midrash in Vayikra Rabbah, and it's commenting on the Torah saying the rules of what's kosher to eat and what's not kosher. And then it mentions four animals, specifically mentions four animals when it comes to land animals, right? For a land animal to be kosher to consume, it has to be what? It has to have two signs, the Torah says. What are they? The split hoof, and that it chews its cud, that it brings up, that it swallows, and then it regurgitates, and then it swallows again, and it chews the cud many times. Those are the two signs for a land animal to be kosher. And then the Torah mentions four exceptions, specifically four. What were those four exceptions? Yeah, so the first two are hard to translate, the arnevet and the shafan. The hare, the hyrax, I don't know, whatever it is, some badger, different ideas of what it is. And then the other two are the camel, right, the gamal, and the pig. And the pig is distinct from the other three. Why is the pig different than the other three?
It has the one sign, but not the others.
Right. The other three do chew their cud, but don't have a split hoof.
The external sign, basically.
Right. The pig, on the other hand, has a split hoof, but does not chew its cud. So the Midrash is commenting on that and says that these four animals, the Torah mentions them because actually they are an allusion to the four exiles of Israel, to the four historical oppressors of Israel. Who's the camel? Zerubbabel, the first exile, was the Babylonian exile. The Babylonians destroyed the first temple and exiled the Jews to Babel. That's represented by the camel. And then Vet Shafan, that's Zumadai, that's the second exile, the Median exile, the Persian Median exile, that's the Shafan. And then Vet Arnevet, the Arnevet is Yavan, is the Greek exile. And finally, all those three are similar because they all were short and ended relatively quickly. The Babylonian exile lasted just 70 years. Right? The Persian exile was short. The Greek exile was short. They all lasted a short amount of time and ended. And that's what the Midrash says, that they are all ma'ale gira shegared malchut achareh. That this is what it means, that it swallows its cud, it regurgitates, meaning it was a short thing, it chewed its cud, it swallowed it, and then the next thing gets regurgitated and it's the next exile. So it's short and it's temporary. And finally, the fourth one, at the chazir zo Edom. The pig is Edom because it does not chew its cud, it does not regurgitate, and it's forever. It seems like this is the longest exile. We've been in this exile for 2,000 years. Unlike the previous three, which were short and discrete, this one is long and seemingly endless. That's the chazir. And then it says, Velama nikra shma chazir. And why is it called chazir? What is the root of chazir? Chozer, right? Which means to return or restore. Why? Shemechazeret atara lebaalea. Because she will restore the crown to its owner. As Ovadia the prophet says, Ve'alu Moshiim behar Tzion lishpot et arei Esav, ve'ayta le'Hashem amlucha. That for God's kingdom to come back to earth, ve'ayta le'Hashem amlucha, there has to be this judgment on Har Seir. Edom will play a critical role in restoring Israel's crown to its former glory. So Edom will play this necessary role and will help to rebuild Israel. And it's interesting that Ovadia says specifically, he doesn't say Israel, he says Tzion, Behar Tzion, which I find particularly appropriate because of the Zionist movement. And if you think about the Zionist movement and who helped to get the Zionist movement going, who were those that were involved? The Western world. Of course, the world of Ishmael was opposed to the Zionist movement for the most part, although there were some Muslim Zionists, and I do want to do a separate class on Muslim Zionism. But generally speaking, the support for the Zionist movement came from the West. And if you remember at the UN vote in 1947, both the Soviet Union and the US, both the USSR and the US voted in favor. The UK abstained for political reasons, which we're going to get to, but it was really the UK, the British, that helped to make this happen. The British were the ones that were fighting the Ottomans, that conquered the Holy Land from the Ottomans, and that issued the Balfour Declaration in 1917, promising to carve out a state for the Jews in 1917. So the British actually played a really important role, although they backtracked a few years later. And originally, the entire Mandate Palestine, both the west bank of the Jordan River and the east of the Jordan River, was supposed to be for the Jews. And then in 1921, the British gave away 77% of it, the entire eastern half, to create this new country called Jordan, which had never existed. There's no such thing as Jordan. In the past, there was no such country as Jordan. And the British gave this chunk of land to the Hashemites, to this Arab clan from what is now Saudi Arabia. The Saudi family and the Hashemite family were kind of fighting each other, and the British settled that dispute by giving the Hashemites Jordan. Just like that, for nothing. They gave up 77% of what was promised to the Jews.
The Ottoman Empire covered the whole region.
Yeah.
They decided to just went with a magic marker and said, okay,
yes,
that's...
They did take a magic marker. The British and the French, they had the Sikes-Picot Treaty Agreement that they just carved out from the Ottoman Empire, the entire Middle East, and made up new countries that never existed before. They made up Iraq. There was never such a country called Iraq. And they completely had total disregard for the actual boundaries and cultural, ethnic boundaries. Kurdistan, poor Kurdistan never got a country, but Kurdistan is huge. And there's still, to this day, the Kurds are fighting for a homeland. The French and British just made arbitrary countries like Iraq, like Jordan, that never previously existed, with total disregard for actual realities on the ground.
I often wonder why they gave up 95% of the land to all the Arabs and gave us this little sliver of a piece.
I think the British felt like if they give up the eastern half, the 77%, the majority, to the Arabs, then the Arabs will be satisfied. There's your two-state solution. The British were the first to implement a two-state solution. We'll give this quarter of it on the west side to the Jews. We'll give 3/4 on the east to the Arabs, the Palestinian Arabs, meaning the Arabs living in Mandate Palestine, and that was the two-state solution. People talk about a two-state solution today. The British already implemented a two-state solution. That was it, because this whole land was Palestine. There is already a Palestinian state. People forget that. And they don't like when we say it. The left wing and the anti-Zionist hate when you say it. But Jordan literally is Palestine. It was literally carved out of Mandate Palestine. And no such country as Jordan ever existed before. Jordan is Palestine. Yasser Arafat, remember, in 1970, 1971, Yasser Arafat actually tried to take over Jordan. And the Jordanians went to war with Yasser Arafat. The PLO and the Jordanian army went to war. And that's actually called the Jordanian Civil War. They actually call it the Civil War because it was really, the truth is, just Palestinian Arabs killing each other. Jordan ultimately killed 25,000 Palestinians. The world didn't protest. Yeah, well, they claim they only killed 3,000. The PLO said that 25,000 were killed. If you remember, it was called Black September. And so the Jordanians went to war with the PLO. It was a whole thing. So Yasser Arafat wanted to take over Jordan because for him, that was Palestine too. He wanted the whole thing. So Jordan literally is Palestine. And also in 1950, Jordan annexed the West Bank. Nobody made a fuss when Jordan annexed the West Bank. Right? In 1948, King Abdullah of Jordan actually said that Jordan is Palestine and the West Bank belongs to them, and he annexed it 2 years later. Nobody cared. And even after they lost it in 1967, they still maintained that it's theirs. And in 1981, King Hussein of Jordan, and I quote, he said, "The truth is that Jordan is Palestine and Palestine is Jordan." End quote. So you can look this up. Right. You can solve the conflict very easily. Just rename Jordan to Palestine. They already have the same flag. It's the same flag. The majority of the people who live in Jordan are Palestinians and identify as such. So it is a Palestinian state.
Because it was never about a Palestinian state. It was always about...
Right. It was always about destroying the Jews. Yeah, and the PLO used to admit that readily, that the whole Palestinian movement exists only to destroy Israel. They readily admit that there's no such thing as a Palestinian. Zuhair Musin said it. He was one of the PLO leaders. Fatih Hamad said it recently. He's one of the Hamas Minister of the Interior. I don't know if you saw this. He had this rant on Egyptian TV. And he said, why has Egypt abandoned the Palestinians? He said, we are Egyptians. He says, half the Palestinians are Egyptians and half are Saudis. We are you. We're the same people. He says so many people, there's at least 30 families, he says, that are Al-Masri, where he lives, that are Egyptian. He's literally ranting on Egyptian TV, this Hamas minister, saying, don't you get it? There's no such thing as a Palestinian. We're all Egyptians and Saudis. We're doing your dirty work fighting the Jews, because that's the ultimate goal. So they'll admit it to each other in Arabic on their TV, but of course they'll never admit it to the world. That's what happened with Jordan, which the British just conjured out of thin air in 1921. But aside from that, originally the British actually did support the creation of a Jewish state, and ultimately they left it to the UN, and that's why they abstained from the UN vote. And the British royal family actually never visited officially, refused to visit Israel officially because of all the tension that was there before, and the Zionist leaders were trying to fight off the British and so on. So the British royal family never had a very complicated relationship with Israel, although, interestingly, last week, I actually happened to meet the chief rabbi of the UK and the Commonwealth, Rabbi Ephraim Mirvis. You've heard of him? He's technically our chief rabbi too, because he's the chief rabbi of the Commonwealth, and we're part of the Commonwealth. So he visited our school last week, and wonderful individual, and inspired a lot of the students. And he actually mentioned that he's a very close friend of King Charles, and has been for a while. And he said that he believes that King Charles is a true friend of the Jews and the genuine Philo-Semite. So it's nice to hear that we do have friends. And he also happened to mention, Mike, you'll like this, he happened to mention Jacob Rothschild, because Jacob Rothschild is the poster child for the anti-Semites. Until he passed away not long ago, he was on like every anti-Semitic conspiracy theory about the Rothschilds. Jacob Rothschild was on it. And they make fun of him. They say he's like Mr. Burns from The Simpsons. And there are videos of people harassing him on the streets. It's actually really sad. And attacking him. And you'll see all these like memes and posters that Rothschild owns the world and he has trillions of dollars and all this stuff. And I personally did a deep dive into the whole Rothschild conspiracy theory several years ago. And on my other website, the Jew of the Week website, I used to do an old website called Jew of the Week, and I did a series of essays on the Rothschilds. And anyway, I didn't see anything sinister or anything conspiratorial. I just saw a family that was very successful in banking and finance and did a lot of good and invested huge amounts of money into the industrialization of the Western world and building schools and hospitals, and did really a ton of philanthropy. I don't know if there's any family that gave more money to philanthropic causes than the Rothschilds. And also, yes, helped to establish Israel. That's also in the anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, that Israel is a Rothschild state. The truth is that actually there were many in the Rothschild family that were anti-Zionist. Some were pro-Zionist, and the most famous of them was Edmund de Rothschild from the Paris family, because there were 5 different Rothschild families, 5 sons, that split up across Europe.
Is he the father? Is he the first?
No, Edmund de Rothschild is not the first. He's a grandson. The first is Mayer Anschel Rothschild, who was from Frankfurt. And then he had 5 sons, and he sent them to open 5 branches, to London, Paris, Vienna. And then the 2 big ones that remained was the British and the French. The others basically all died either before the Holocaust or during the Holocaust. The Nazis wiped out those banks. And yeah, so 2 remained. And so Edmund de Rothschild was from the French Rothschilds. He gave a lot of money and bought a lot of the land, like 125,000 acres in Israel, and gave the money to drain the swamps and to plant forests and to lay the first electrical grids and water pipes and all these things, and established a lot of the first settlements. Zichron Yakov is named after his father. So Edmund de Rothschild's father was Yakov, James Yakov Rothschild. He named Zichron Yakov after him. So he gave a lot of the Rishon LeZion and all these like Metula, Rosh Pinah. He gave money for all of those to get those going. So yes, the Rothschilds also helped to bring Israel about. But again, no conspiracy. I mentioned this because there was a lot of comments on the YouTube channel that were anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. Oh, people saying the Rothschilds are Edom. Why are the Rothschilds Edom? Because Rothschild means red shield, right? So it must be that they're Edomites. Not everything red is Edom, right? People get carried away. Edom has a very specific character. Not everything red. The Detroit Red Wings are not Edomites just because they're red and their jersey is red. And neither are red M&Ms. You can eat red M&Ms. The Rothschilds are called Rothschilds because where they lived in Frankfurt, there was like a red banner over their door or whatever. So Rabbi Mirvis was saying that he gave the eulogy at Jacob Rothschild's funeral, and he knew him as well. And he was saying that he was also a genuine philanthropist and somebody who tried to make the world a better place. So I thought it's worth mentioning that from somebody who actually knew him personally very well. And it's good to remember that. There's all these anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. The reason that they exist is because people genuinely see certain conspiracy things, certain weird things, evil things happening in the world. We talked about last time about the Seirim, the goat demons, all of that weird thing in the music industry in Hollywood of pushing this strange ideology and tied that with the sexualization of young people and all of this, that whole agenda. So people see that and they're saying, where's that coming from? And the easy answer is to say, oh, it must be the Jews. It's a scapegoating. You don't know who, you recognize that somebody's doing something wrong. But who's doing it, you don't know. So you say, well, it must be the Jews that are doing it, right? And then somebody like Jeffrey Epstein comes along. It's like, no, you see, I told you, right? Here's an evil Jew. It must be that all Jews are evil. But what's funny is when Puff Daddy comes along, P. Diddy does the same thing. You don't hear anybody saying, must be that all black people are evil. Nobody does that. Right? P. Diddy can do the same thing that Epstein did, maybe worse. But nobody jumps to the conclusion that it must be that all black people are doing this and they're part of this conspiracy. It's very easy to blame the Jews, and to one Jew does something wrong, and that means they're all evil. And it's just easy to blame the Jews. And we said last time that that's been throughout history, of using the Jew as a scapegoat. And remember, the Seir le'Azazel that's where the term scapegoat comes from. Scapegoat comes from the procedure in temple times of taking a seir, this goat, and throwing him to Azazel as an atonement for this fallen angel, demon, Azazel. So the Jew became the scapegoat. For all of the sins of the world, blame it on the Jew, exterminate the Jew, right? Blaming the Jew is just an easy way out, because people do recognize there's something wrong with the world, but instead of trying to actually make the world a better place, it's easy to just say, oh, it's that evil Jew again, right? And it's so easy to brainwash people with the most absurd conspiracy theories, and they'll believe it. I sometimes think that the people that are genuinely behind those conspiracies, that are actually pushing these evil agendas, I sometimes think that they're deliberately releasing information to blame Jews for it. They hide behind the Jew. They know that the ignorant masses will believe it. So they deliberately put out the propaganda that the Jew is your enemy. Right? This is the Jew doing this. And then that saves their own skin, and then it gets everybody off their backs so that everybody's focused on the Jews. There's all this anti-Semitism. A lot of it is actually coming from the world of Edom, but there's also a lot of philo-Semitism and genuine support for Jews coming from the same world of Edom. A lot of that is coming from the evangelical Christian community in the U.S. and in general the pro-Israel community in the U.S., but the evangelical Christians in particular that are really helping Israel in a big way and sending a lot of donations to Israel and going to volunteer in Israel in many different, working in Israeli farms and fields, and it's amazing. And some people are weary of those things. They think that those Christians are not genuinely lovers of Israel, that they're just doing it because either they want to missionize and convert Jews to Christianity, or they're only doing it to bring about, to hasten the rapture and to bring back Jesus, because this will bring the second coming of Jesus, right? So yes, the Christians want that, sure. They want to bring about, for the same reason that Jews want to bring Mashiach. Same. Everybody wants the final redemption. We all want Geula. We all want Mashiach to come. We want Mashiach to come for the first time. They want their Messiah to come for the second time. But ultimately, it's going to be one Messiah. We're all working towards the final redemption. So yes, they want to bring about the final redemption. Is it true that they all want to convert Jews to Christianity? I don't think so. From my conversations with many of them, I don't think so. It's a lot more sophisticated than that. And a lot of them just genuinely want to help the Jewish people recognize that Jesus was a Jew, and so were all of his apostles and disciples, and that Jesus walked the land in Judea and Galilee and Israel. And a lot of Christians that I speak to, they just want to genuinely understand Judaism. So I think a lot of them actually do have genuine love for Israel, and it's not that there's an ulterior motive. Both sides want to bring about the Messianic age. We have a different understanding of who Mashiach is, but we both have the same goal ultimately.
Evangelicals breed a red heifer for...
Yeah, and American Christians, ranchers have brought red cows, para aduma, red heifers to Israel, for sure. They help in many different ways, and that's great. And it's funny that it's a red heifer. So think about, again, the connection to the Detroit Red Wings. I mean, to Edom. So and a lot of them have a genuine thirst for Torah. They really want to understand Scripture properly, the way that Jesus would have understood it. So again, Christians and Jews have a lot in common, and we're natural allies. And the Torah actually says, we forget this, but the Torah actually says that we are brothers. And there's a command in the Torah, in the 613 commandments. It says very clearly in Sefer Dvarim, Lo teta'ev adomi ki achicha hu. You shall not abhor an Edomite because he is your brother. We actually there's a command there that we have to respect each other and work together. And, on the Birkat Kohanim, how does Birkat Kohanim end? Priestly blessing, Birkat Kohanim, Yisa Hashem panav elecha, vayasem lecha shalom. And the Baal HaTurim says something amazing. He says, what's the gematria of shalom, of peace? Exactly. Shin Lamed Vav Mem is 376. 376, the Baal HaTurim says, Shalom begimatria Esav. The gematria of peace is Asav, which is bizarre. How could that be? It seems to be the opposite. Yitzchak said that Esav will live by his sword, that he'll be bloody, that he'll cause tons of bloodshed. And yet, here we see the gematria, actually numerically, Asav means peace. The Baal HaTurim says, first of all, Leramez, Avei Makdim Shalom Lechol Adam, Afilu Beshalom Nochri, that a Jew has to make peace with everybody. Even Asav, even any Gentile, any Nochri, any foreigner, the Jews have to make peace. That's our job, to bring peace to the world. And even Asav, you might think that Asav's like our enemy, Asav's always after us, Asav's oppressing us. No, we have to make peace even with Asav and work together even with Asav. And the deeper meaning there is that Asav is the key to bringing peace to the world, ultimately. Edom, Asav, the gematria is 376 because Asav will play a critical role in bringing peace to the world at the end of days. And if you remember, we quoted Rashi last time. Yakov promised to go to Esav's land, to Seir, but he didn't go. So how's it possible? He didn't lie. Because Rashi says, no, he said that he will go to Esav and reunite with his brother at the end of days. So it's an old prophecy that at the end of days, in which we are now, it's time for Yakov and Asav to reconcile and reunite. And this is something that we miss when you study Tanakh. What's amazing is the Tanakh actually said, and the midrash says, that why did the Jewish people go into exile to begin with? Because Israel mistreated Edom. It's an amazing thing. Where is it coming from? It's coming from the book of Kings, from Melachim. There's a small little episode there that we overlook all the time, and that's where Petra is mentioned. Last time I brought up Petra. If you remember, Petra is in what is today Jordan. There's this rock outcropping. You've seen it before? It's like a big rock outcropping, and it's carved in. Yes, exactly. So Petra is actually mentioned here because Petra used to be Edomite territory. That was part of Edom. And it says that the king, Amaziah, went to war with Edom. Hu ika et Edom, he struck Edom, begei melach, in the valley of salt, aseret alafim, 10,000 Edomites were killed. V'tafas et hasela b'milchama, and they were able to capture the Sela, Petra, which means, Petra literally means in Greek a rock. Petra, Peter means rock. So they were Sela in Hebrew, the boulder, the rock outcropping. They were able to capture the Sela b'milchama, veikra et shema Yoktel ad hayom hazeh, and they renamed it Yoktel until this day. That's what the Tanakh says, and that's what Melachim says. And in Chronicles, in Divrei Hayamim, it adds more details. And ve'aseret alafim chaim shavu bnei Yehuda, and 10,000 were captured. 10,000 more Edomites were captured by the Judeans. Ve'yavium lerosh hasala, and they brought them to the top of Petra, of the boulder. And what did they do? Ve'yashlichum merosh hasela ve'chulam nifkeu. They threw down these 10,000 Edomites from the top of Petra, from the top of this rock outcropping. The Judeans slaughtered 20,000 Edomites, 10,000 of which they threw in a very cruel fashion from the top of Petra. As a little side point, there's an amazing thing that I realized when we talked about last time that Asav married, after his first two Canaanite wives. You remember who he married? He married, we said, the daughter, Machlat bat Ishmael, and then it says, Achot Nevayot, the sister of Nevayot. And one of these questions, again, is why is this important to tell us that she was the sister of Nevayot? Who cares? It's like with Timnah and Achot Lotan. That was important, that Timnah was the sister of Lotan. Why is it important? And then we saw that Timnah gave birth to Amalek. Why does the Torah have to mention? It should have just said, Esav married the daughter of Ishmael. End of story. But it says, no, he specifically married the sister of Nevayot. And I realized something, because who was in Edom later, in Petra? Petra is associated with Arab Bedouins called Nabateans. And the Greeks, actually, there was a famous battle of Petra in 312 BCE between the Greeks, one of Alexander's successors, and the Nabateans. It was a great battle at Petra. And then it hit me that why the Torah has to mention this. It's actually really important. Because the question is, how did Petra, which started off as an Edomite stronghold, become an Arab Nabatean stronghold? And the Torah is telling you why. Because Edom married the sister of Nevayot. Nevayot is the Nabateans. It's one of the Arab clans. Asav married into the Nevayot family. So now we can understand why there were Nabateans in Petra. It's actually really important. I think that's really the pshat here. That's why the Torah mentions Achot Nevayot. I don't know if that was obvious to you. It wasn't to me until recently. But that's why Petra started off as an Edomite place and then became a Nabatean Arab place, because Asav actually married into the Nabatean family. So the Judeans threw 10,000 people, 10,000 Edomites in a cruel fashion off the rock. And the midrash says this, Be'ota sha'ah amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God said at that moment, Be'ota sha'ah amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, ma elo asin kan? What are these Jews doing here? How can they do this? How can my people do something so cruel? Let them be iglu, let them be exiled. Kevan shechatu galu. And because they sinned, they were exiled. So why were they put into exile? The midrash says it was that moment, because they killed cruelly 10,000 Edomites. Midah keneged midah. they would go on to be exiled by the Edomites for a very long exile, 2,000-year exile. So it's a story you don't hear very often. But the reason that we're in this 2,000-year Edomite exile is actually because of this cruel act that the Judeans did to the Edomites. Of course, chronologically, this was even before Bavel, but that was the reason why Israel deserved an Edomite exile afterwards. It was measure for measure, midah keneged midah. So we went into exile for mistreating Edom. And we have to fix that. And the idea is that we have to reunite at the end of days. And maybe that's what's happening now. Maybe that's the role of this Trump era. Some people see Trump as the good part of Edom, the head of Asav. Could Trump be that head of Asav? I mean, visually his head is like Asav. He's ginger, he's red. But maybe that's a sign. I don't know. Does orange count? Does orange count as Edom? I don't know. But there is another possibility here. And I want to go back to the Star of Jacob prophecy from the Zohar that we've been going back to for the past year. What does that prophecy say? If you remember, we already witnessed the first part of it, hopefully realized. It says that on the 25th of Elul, on a Friday night, a star will appear in the sky for 70 days. You remember that? And on that same day, 3 buildings will fall, a great palace will fall, and an oppressor of Israel will be killed. And that we witnessed on September 27. A comet appeared in the sky, and at the same time, the IDF struck 3 buildings in Beirut, and those buildings fell, and the headquarters beneath them were destroyed, the Hezbollah headquarters, and Hassan Nasrallah, this oppressor of Israel who's been harming Israeli and Lebanese citizens for the past 30 years, died. So that part of the prophecy hopefully was fulfilled. Hopefully that really was it. And then it says that star will appear in the sky for 70 days. And there was this comet, not a star, but a comet, a moving star, it says, Darach Kochav mi Yakov. And you could see it. I saw it from my backyard. You could see it with the naked eye. Now it's probably faded almost entirely, but the Zohar says it'll be in the sky for 70 days. And in the midst of that, the Zohar says what will happen. Uve'emtzaut alma, and in the middle of the world, kadit nahirau kochava, when that comet will still be up, within that 70-day period, within which we are now, 70 days will be December 6th. So we're still here. Be'emtzaut rekia, ikom malka chad rav v'shalit be'alma. A new king will rise in the world. A new leader will arise in the world. Ve'idgaeh ruche al kol malchin. And his spirit will literally idgaeh. He will be so proud. He will have such a huge ego that's what it means. Ve'idgaeh ruche. He will be of such haughty spirit that he will overpower the kings of the world. That's the literal translation. I'm not making this up. The Zohar says this for thousands of years. And this will actually awaken wars on both sides of the world. But he will be able to overcome them. Maybe that is Trump, who just got reelected a couple of weeks ago. And the Zohar is saying that during this period, within the 70-day period, a king of very haughty spirit will arise. And then that's going to push this prophecy further to bring about the Messianic age. So could this be referring to Trump? The timing is great. We're still within the 70-day period. The election happened actually exactly 40 days from the star's appearance, which is interesting.
But he doesn't take office until January.
That's fine, but he arose now, and he's already selecting his cabinet members. And the conversation right now is already all about Trump. Nobody talks about Biden's done. It's as if the presidency for Biden's over anyways. Well, for him, it was over a long time ago. It's all shifted now to Trump. And actually, that it's 40 days is significant because there's a parallel passage, not here in the Zohar, but in the Zohar on Shmot. This is in Balak. The Zohar on Shmot actually does separate the 70 days into 40 and 30. So that actually might be very significant also.
It might also be significant that Trump himself admits and confesses the fact that, and I quote, I am the chosen one.
Right. That is being of haughty spirit. Other people see Trump, or together with this, as maybe a modern-day Cyrus. If you remember Koresh was the Persian emperor who defeated the Babylonians and allowed the Jews to go back to he ended the Babylonian exile, even ended it a little bit early. 18 years before it should have. They should have been exiled for 70 years. Ultimately, they were. I'm not going to go into that story now. But actually, 18 years prior, after just 52 years, Cyrus took over, according to the Jewish chronological account. And Cyrus, we have the Cyrus cylinder. We actually have this historical archaeological document that Cyrus permitted not just the Jews, but all the people conquered by the Babylonians and assimilated or mixed around and exiled to go back to their homes. And the Jews as well were able to go back to their homeland and rebuild the temple. That's when the second temple was built. And if you remember, the Tanakh actually says, Ishayahu says, Ko amar Hashem limshicho lakoresh. God said to his Messiah, to Koresh, which is really weird. Limshicho, to his anointed one, to Koresh. That he would do this, that he would, Asher itchazakti be'emino lerad lefanav goim umatnei melachim, that God gave him the power to subdue kings and nations. Why? So that he could bring the Jews back into the Holy Land. God orchestrated all of that for Cyrus to be so powerful and to be able to dominate other kings, to allow ultimately the Jews to come back to Israel and build the second temple. And big question, how could it say that he was Mashiach? Limshicho lekoresh. Mashiach? How could he be Mashiach? Cyrus wasn't even Jewish as far as we know. He wasn't part of that Abrahamic tradition. It's actually maybe possible that he was maternally, because if you remember previously, the Assyrians exiled the northern tribes. So it's very possible that his mother could have come from one of the lost tribes of Israel. Perhaps, no, it's possible. Why not? They were exiled to that region where he was from anyways. And one of those exiled tribes was Yosef, right? Ephraim and Neshed, they were exiled. And Kol HaTorah actually says that he had a spark of Mashiach ben Yosef. So it's actually very possible that he had maternally descent from Yosef. Paternally, he was a Persian, Iranian, but maternally, he actually could have come from Yosef and maybe actually was, halachically, had Israelite status. But generally speaking, he couldn't have been Mashiach, although Kol HaTorah said he had a spark of Mashiach ben Yosef. And Mashiach ben Yosef has 3 tasks, according to Kol HaTorah. We discussed this before. To reveal secrets of Torah, to reveal a new dimension of Torah, to bring about the ingathering of the exiles, to bring the Jews back to Israel, and to defeat all the evil in the world embodied by Amalek, which we discussed last time. This evil spirit of Amalek and all of this goat demon worship, Seirim, and all of that sexual immorality that we discussed last time. Those are the 3 tasks of Mashiach ben Yosef. Now, Cyrus didn't do those things. Cyrus only really was involved in one of those things, which is the ingathering of the exiles. Trump could be the same, meaning some kind of that spark of the Mashiach ben Yosef process of helping to facilitate the ingathering of the exiles. It's possible that he might fulfill that role. And Mashiach doesn't mean literally the Messiah with a capital M. It just means the anointed one, chosen by God. Mashiach with a lowercase m. Because remember, in Tanakh, there's never a Mashiach with an uppercase mem, m. Not that Hebrew has uppercase and lowercase, but every time the word Mashiach appears in Tanakh, it's always referring to somebody else, not the Messiah. It's always referring to, in the Chumash, it always says Kohen Mashiach, the anointed high priest. And later in Tanakh as well, Mashiach is always referring to somebody else, some king, some priest, never to the Messiah at the end of days. So it's important to remember that as well. Can Trump be like Cyrus, a Mashiach with a lowercase m, meaning somebody appointed by God, chosen by God to play this important role in restoring Israel? Again, restoring the crown. It's possible. I'm not saying that's for sure what it is. I think Trump has that potential. And we see from the past year, he survived 2 assassination attempts, and in a pretty miraculous way, a bullet that grazed his ear. You can imagine how close that was. It's hard not to see God's hand in that. Now, there is a big however here. What's the however? The however is that Cyrus didn't quite finish his job. The Gemara says in Masechet Megillah, it asks about this Koresh business. Ko amar Koresh melech paras, kol mamlechot haaretz natan li Hashem. So again, Koresh, like Trump, was very proud and haughty. He says, Ko amar Koresh, God gave me everything, right? I have everything. Kol mamlechot haaretz natan li. I have all the world under my fingertips. Ve'u fakad alai livnot lo bait beYerushalayim. and he commanded me to build a house in Jerusalem. Darash Rav Nachman bar Rav Chisda. Why does it say, Ko amar Hashem limshicho leKoresh? Ki Koresh Mashiach haya? Koresh wasn't the Messiah. What actually happened? Ela amar le'akadosh baruch hu leMashiach. What really happened is that God told Mashiach, Kovela nilecha al Koresh. I'm complaining to you about Koresh. I told him to build my house in Jerusalem and ingather all the exiles, bring all the Jews back. And he said, Ve'u amar mi bachem mikol amo vaya'al. But Cyrus didn't fulfill that command. He just said, okay, who wants to go back to Israel? If you want to, you can go. If you don't, you don't have to. And then, although he gave them permission to build the temple, he didn't actually build it. And then if you know the story, the temple construction was paused, and it was on hold for a number of years until Cyrus died. Cyrus actually didn't live to see the second temple. So God put him there, gave him all this power to complete the ingathering of the exiles and usher in the temple, but Koresh didn't do it. He didn't do either. He made it optional to go to Israel, and he didn't finish building the temple. So he didn't do his job. And so Rav Nachman is saying, what does this mean? Ko amar Hashem limshicho laKoresh. Ko amar Hashem limshicho. God told the Messiah about Koresh that he didn't do his job. He put a little comma there. Ko amar Hashem limshicho, comma, leKoresh. So that's why I say there's a however here, because if Trump really does have this potential to be like a Cyrus figure, it's not guaranteed. And it could very well end up being a failure like in the times of Koresh. So it's important to remember that, to temper our optimism a little bit. But let's pray, but who knows. Now, there's one other thing about Trump that I want to mention. There was a man, in the times of King David, there was a man named Oved-Edom, which literally means the Edomite servant, or servant of Edom, right? Oved-Edom. Strange name to have. And he's a very mysterious figure because he just appears out of nowhere. And he's mentioned in both Divrei Hayamim and in Shmuel. And the story is that when King David wanted to bring the Ark of the Covenant, the Aron HaKodesh, the original Ark of the Covenant, King David wanted to bring it to Jerusalem. King David made Jerusalem the capital and wanted to bring the Ark of the Covenant there. He wanted to build a temple, but God didn't want him to build a temple. God said, your son Shlomo will build the temple. But King David wanted to at least bring the Ark of the Covenant there. And as they were bringing it in, they had this procession. It was great. It was a party. But then the Ark of the Covenant hit something in the side, a pothole, and started to fall. And a man named Uzzah grabbed it to try and hold it up, but he actually died. He couldn't handle the holiness and the power of the Ark of the Covenant. You know, nobody could touch the Ark. It had this energy, maybe chashmal. It had this divine electricity around it. So Uzzah touched it and got electrocuted and died. So King David thought that, okay, this is a bad sign. God maybe doesn't want me to do this. And they just kind of parked the ark nearby in the house of this person named Oved-Edom. And it stayed there for 3 months. God blessed, Vayvarech Hashem et bet Oved-Edom ve'et kol asher lo. God blessed Oved-Edom. And then when King David saw that God blessed him, he said, okay, it's safe now. It's not killing anybody. Let's move it. And then he moved it to its spot on the Temple Mount. Now, who is this person? He's this mysterious person. Nobody knows who he is. He's called Oved-Edom Hagiti, the Gittite, which means that he's probably from Gath, which is a Philistine town. So is he a Philistine? What is he doing here in this procession in Jerusalem? Is he a Jew? Is he a Philistine? So the midrash says, Bamidbar Rabbah, he was a Levi. We know he was a Levi because there's another place in Divrei Hayamim that lists him in the genealogies of Levites. So he was actually a Levite. Levi haya Oved-Edom Hagiti. Ve'Oved-Edom ve'Echav 62. There were 62 of them in this family. Ve'lama nikra shmo Oved. Why was he called Oved? Al yadei she'avad lifnei Hashem karaui. He was a servant of God. He was not a servant of Edom, but he was actually a genuine servant of God. And he was called Edom shehedim pnei David because he actually embarrassed David through all this whole affair. It caused some embarrassment to King David. Hagiti, he's called the Gittite because he was born in Gat. He was not a Philistine, he was a Levite, but he was born in a Philistine town. And he was a genuine servant of God, a righteous person. He merited to have the ark with him for 3 months. So we don't know much else. It's a very puzzling, interesting story. But I think there is a lesson here for Donald Trump too, if he listens to this, that he could be like Oved-Edom, meaning somebody who is a servant of God, potentially, an Edomite servant of God, who has some Jewish genealogy, lineage too. He has grandkids that are Jewish. So can Trump be like an Oved-Edom if he's genuinely going to serve Hashem and help to be a conduit for bringing the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem?
Did you know that Trump has a reproduction of the Ark of the Covenant at Mar-a-Lago?
Oh, does he?
Yes.
There you go.
It's apparently
Amazing.
one of the most authentic reproductions of it.
Amazing. No, I have not heard that. Let's see. Maybe it's a sign. The fact that he has an Ark of the Covenant at Mar-a-Lago, if that's a thing, maybe it's just another sign that he could be a conduit for the Ark, like Oved-Edom, that Hashem blessed to have the merit to have the Ark of the Covenant for 3 months before it went up to its rightful place, restored, I should say, to its rightful place on the Temple Mount. And I think this is all part of this whole idea of Edom being like the Chazir, who is Choser, who is Machzir, who will help to restore the crown of Israel to its former glory. To finish with the Star of Jacob prophecy, the Star of Jacob prophecy says, if you remember, that after 70 days there's going to be some kind of earthquake in Israel, and after that earthquake, it specifically says that the spirit of Mashiach will come. Itaer rucha dimshicha alayhu veyashatzei leEdom chayava, and then Mashiach will be able to suppress the wicked part of Edom. Not all of Edom, because again, Edom has a lot of good in it. But the Edom Chayava, the negative part of Edom, will be that goat demon part. The Seir part will be finally defeated. V'chol aradi Seir yokid benura. So specifically the Seir part, the goat part, will be the wicked, ungodly, sexually immoral part, will be finally subdued by Mashiach, and then eventually... Again, the Zohar here quotes Ovadia that Alu Moshim Behar Tzion, that the Savior shall arise on Zion, and God will be Vayah Hashem lemelech al kol haaretz, and God will finally be king over the whole earth. Bayom hahu yeh Hashem echad u'shmo echad, God will be one finally. That's how that prophecy ends. Now, we have one last question to address, because we want to talk about Herod. The subtitle was Trump and Herod. And this is the big question that from the beginning, really I wanted to start with that question. But here we are. How did Edom become Rome? Who said that Edom is Rome? That's the big question. So we have to go back to chapter 36 of Bereshit. The last verse over there, where it talks about the different clans of Edom, it says, Aluf Magdiel, there was a chief of Edom named Magdiel, Aluf Iram, another chief named Iram, and then it ends by saying, Ela Alufei Edom, these were the chiefs of Edom, Limoshvotam, where they lived, Be'eretz Achuzatam, in their place, U Asav Avi Edom. That's how the chapter ends. This was the genealogies of Asav, the forefather of all Edomites. So the last two chiefs mentioned in the last verse are Magdiel and Iram. And Rashi says, anybody know what Rashi says?
Magdiel is Rome, huh?
Good. Rashi says, Magdiel hi Romi. Magdiel is Rome. Where does he get that? Where did Rashi get that? That Magdiel is Rome. Rashi is giving us seemingly a genealogical link between Edom and Rome. Magdiel is the founder of Rome, or Magdiel is Rome. Where did he get that? Now, this is a little bit troubling also, because why did he say that Magdiel is Rome? What would have been better to say?
Becomes Rome.
It says Aluf Magdiel, Aluf Iram, or Irom, if with the kamatz. Aluf Magdiel, Aluf Irom. What makes more sense to be Rome? Irom. Irom sounds like Ir Rome, right? The city of Rome. Why does Rashi say, so the Emla Mikra says, this was Rav Eliyahu ben Amozeg, who's one of the great Sephardi Kabbalists, Italian Sephardi rabbi Kabbalists, who actually lived in Livorno. He lived in Rome and in Livorno, so he knew Rome better than anybody. He was Italian. And he says, Pirush Rashi, Magdiel ze Romi, but he says, it's strange, V'chach nimshacha minhag etzel hapaytanim, lekanot Romi b'shem Magdiel, that's why, because Rashi says this, people would always refer to Rome as Magdiel, the Paitanim would anyways. He says, I always was puzzled by this. Why would he say that it's Magdiel. It should have said Iram. ויותר נכון לפרש Iram al Romi. כי כן הייתה נקראת. This is what it sounds like, literally, Iram sounds like city of Rome. So he says, I'm puzzled by this. Why does Rashi say Magdiel? It makes a lot more sense to say Iram. And then he actually points out, actually he doesn't point out, another commentary called Birkat Asher points out that where did Rashi get this from? Rashi got it from the midrash, from Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer. And Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer says, Velakach Esav kol ma she'iniach aviv. Esav took all that his father gave him. Ve'eretz Yisrael u'me'arat ha'machpelah lakach Yakov. So Yakov got the land of Israel. Asav left the land of Israel to Yakov, took a bunch of other things, and went to Edom. And they made a deal between them. Katvu ktav olam beineihem. They made a treaty, an eternal treaty. Amar lo Yaakov le'Esav, lech me'eretz achuzati me'eretz Kna'an. That Yaakov told Esav, please go away from my land. This is my land now. I got the birthright. I have the deed to this land. This is my land. And because Esav voluntarily gave it up, he didn't fight him for it. Esav left the Holy Land to Yakov voluntarily and went to Edom. And because of that, he merited Natan lo mea medinot miseir ve'ad Magdiel. And therefore, God rewarded him with 100 provinces from Seir, from Edom, all the way to Magdiel. Shene'emar aluf Magdiel aluf Iram ze Romi. This is where it comes from. And Magdiel and Iram are Rome. So Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer actually says they're both Rome. And Esav was gifted 100 provinces from Seir all the way to Rome. And if you look up a map of the Roman Empire, Seir, Edom, was essentially the eastern edge of the Roman Empire. And I looked up how many provinces and regions were in Rome. And at the time of Diocletian, at the peak of the Roman Empire, they were 96. There were 96 provinces in the Roman Empire, stretching from all the way in the west, from Britannia and Spain, Hispania, to Edom, Idumea in the east. So the midrash is actually recounting. The midrash knew, Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer lived during this time. He knew that Rome had almost 100 provinces. So he's saying God blessed him with this gift because Esav voluntarily gave up the Holy Land to Yaakov. God blessed him with 100 provinces. And the Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer is really saying that Iram ze Romi. He's saying both of them, Magdiel and Iram ze. So I think it actually does make sense to say, even just by the sound of it, that Iram is Rome. And one of Esav's descendants, maybe that is Romulus and Remus, the mythological, legendary founders of Rome, were descendants of Esav. Their origins are also mysterious, right? They were raised by the wolf. So it could be that they actually come from Esav, and so you actually have a direct link, perhaps a direct genealogical link between Esav and Rome. And that's where the connection is being made. And of course, Rome did have these red colors. The patron god of Rome was Mars, the god of war. Mars, the red planet. The Roman soldiers wore red. So Rome was actually symbolized, the Roman army was symbolized by the color red, as was the patron god of Rome, who was Mars, and Mars being the red planet, and so on. So I think that's where you have the link between Edom and Rome, how Esav evolved into the Roman Empire. And actually I had my own little solution for why Rav Ben Amozek's question of why does Rashi say Magdiel and not the more obvious one, which is Iram? And this is just my short little hypothesis on it, which is that it could be both. Meaning, the Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer says it's both Magdiel and Iram. And I think if you look at the meaning of the words, Magdiel, what does Magdiel mean? A Magid, if you split it as Magid El, a Magid is a preacher. Magdiel can also mean preacher of God. So I think that Rashi's telling us that there's both here, Rashi and Rav Eliyahu ben Amozek and Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, that Rome can be both, that Edom could be both Iram, which has the letters Ra, which has evil in it, but it can also be Magdiel, it could also be God's preacher. And that is Edomite history. On the one hand, there's a lot of evil there that Europe committed and the Western world and the world of Edom committed. On the other hand, there's all this good preaching the word of God, being Magdiel, spreading the godly message, spreading scripture, spreading the Ten Commandments to the world. So I think there's actually both here, that Rome has a choice, that they could be the bad part of Asav, they can be the good part of Asav. They could be Iram, which has the Ra in it, and they could be the Magdiel, which is the preacher. That's how I like to reconcile these opinions. But we do have an actual genealogical link between Asav and Rome, according to this. Now, to me, that wasn't so strong enough. That didn't prove it. That wasn't the nail in the coffin on the Asav-Rome connection. I wanted something more concrete. And so I had my own hypothesis for why and when Edom started to be used as the key word for Rome. And we'll finish with this. It's just, I haven't heard this anywhere. I don't have a source for it. It's just my own idea. If you like it, you don't. I wrote about it for those who have volume 2 of Garments of Light, I wrote about it. There was an essay called How Asav Became Rome. So if you've read it, you know where I'm going. If not, this is the hypothesis. That 2,000 years ago, Judea was ruled by a king, Herod. The ruler of Judea 2,000 years ago was King Herod, the infamous King Herod, who's reviled in both Jewish tradition and in Christian tradition. Herod was this evil king. He was a cruel tyrant. He slaughtered many people. He slaughtered many rabbis. The Gemara in Bava Batra tells his backstory. It says, originally, he was a servant of the previous dynasty, the Hashmonaim. The Hashmonaim took over during the Hanukkah story. Right? The Hashmonaim were the Maccabees, and they established a dynasty, the Hasmonean dynasty. And they were in charge until the Romans took over. In 63 BCE, Pompey, the general, took over Judea. The Gemara says in Bava Batra, the origin story. He was originally a servant, not necessarily a servant, but originally he worked with the Hasmonean dynasty. And then he usurped the throne. And he said, Amar, man daresh mikerev achecha tasim alecha melech. The Torah says in Dvarim, in the mitzvah to appoint a king, the Torah says you have to appoint a king from your own brothers. It has to be a fellow Israelite or Judean that could be a king. A foreigner cannot be a king of Israel. Neither can a convert be a king of Israel. That means that he took over the throne and he was not a Judean. He arose, katlinehu lechulo rabbanan, that he killed all the rabbis because he knew that the rabbis would never allow him to be king. The rabbis know the Torah. The rabbis will know that he usurped the throne. The rabbis are going to know that he's not allowed to be king, that he's an imposter. They're going to get the people against him. So he killed all the rabbis, except one rabbi, who is Bava ben Buta. He didn't kill him. He wanted to keep one smart Jew as an advisor, so he just blinded him. He poked out his eyes and kept Bava ben Buta, but the other rabbis he slaughtered to reinforce his hold on the throne. That's what the Gemara says. So Herod was not an Israelite. He was not a Judean. Who was he? Where did he come from? Anybody know the backstory of Herod? Herod was born in Edom. Herod was an Idumean. He was an Idumean originally. His mother was a Nabatean from Petra. And his father was an Edomite, an Idumean citizen, Roman. And his father actually became very influential in the Roman politics and was a friend of Julius Caesar. And eventually that allowed Herod to become governor of the Galilee. And then there was a civil war between the Hashmonaim, two brothers among the Hashmonaim, and Herod actually went to Rome to solve this conflict. And when he was in Rome, the Roman Senate said, okay, we don't care about those Hasmoneans, you be the king. So they actually voted him to be the new king of Israel, king of Judea. So Herod comes back. The Roman Senate provided him with a bunch of soldiers from their Syrian position, and he comes back from a diplomatic trip as the Roman appointed client king of Judea with an army and takes over Jerusalem, gets rid of all the competitors vying for the throne, and then also kills all the rabbis who would never accept him. The rabbis accepted the Hashmonaim, even though they were also not supposed to be kings because they were Kohanim. but at least they were from among Israel, so they were accepted. But here was somebody who was an Idumean. Now, the Idumeans did convert to Judaism, or at least assimilated. We don't really know what happened to them, but some say the Maccabees forcibly converted them. The Maccabees conquered Idumea and forcibly converted the Judeans. Others hold that they didn't force. The Judeans just voluntarily intermarried and assimilated with the Jews, or voluntarily converted. We don't know. But by this point, by 2,000 years ago, the Idumeans were at least half Jewish. So Herod identified as part Jewish, part Idumean, and full Roman, because he was the Roman appointed king of Judea. So I think that this is where the connection between Rome and Edom is really concretized, because here you have this oppressor of Israel, this Herod who was reviled by everybody, who slaughtered all the rabbis, who the Jews hated. He was a cruel tyrant. And he was the embodiment of Rome. He's this foreigner who came from Rome, who was appointed by the Senate, who came and took over the throne, a false ruler of Israel. Right? The Edomite exile arguably starts with him, even before the temple is destroyed. It starts with Herod, who lived before the temple was destroyed, because he was the Roman-appointed cruel dictator that imposed this Roman regime on Israel and got rid of the Hasmonean kings, the Jewish kings, essentially. So I think that's where, from then on, the rabbis are using Edom as a code word for Rome, because Herod was an Edomite, representing Rome, appointed by Rome to take over Judea. So now you have another connection between Edom and Rome. And by the way, if you think about this, it actually solves, Herod's critical, because if you appreciate this and you remember what Herod did, it solves many other mysteries in the Gemara. There's another mystery in the Gemara, which is, in Masechet Sukkah, it says that a few times in history, the Torah in Israel was forgotten, and somebody had to come from Babylon and reteach the Torah to the people in Israel. First, it happened during the first exile with the Babylonians. So who came back from Babylon to Israel to revive Jewish life? It was Ezra. So first, Kshenishtakcha Torah miYisrael, ala Ezra miBavel vayasda. First was Ezra. Ezra the scribe came back, the book of Ezra. He came back from Babylon and he revived Torah life. He was a scribe, a sofer, and he reestablished the yeshivas and retaught Torah, because Torah was desolate from Israel for 70 years since the Babylonians came. And it happened again. The Gemara continues and says, Chazra v'nishtakcha, was again forgotten. And who came to rebuild it? Allah Hillel, a Bavli v'yasda. Hillel, the great Hillel HaZaken came. Hillel was born in Babylon. And he came to Israel when he was much older and reestablished it. So this is, right away, you should have a question. Wow, Hillel restored Torah in Israel? Why was the Torah forgotten before Hillel came? When did Hillel live? Hillel died in the year 10.
And what was Herod?
Herod died in the year, some say 4 BC or maybe 1 CE, around that time. So Hillel lived just a little longer. He was a contemporary of Herod and lived just 10 years more than Herod. So what did Herod do? Herod slaughtered all the rabbis, shut down all the yeshivas. That's why the Torah was forgotten from Israel. So Hillel had to come back and reestablish all the schools. And that's why, this is huge, because that's why if you ever study Mishnah and Gemara, it's all Hillel and Shammai and their students. So you have to ask, what about everybody before then? Why is the whole Mishnah, basically everything in the Mishnah, is either from Hillel or Shammai, directly or indirectly? There's really nothing before. There's a few people that are quoted from before Hillel and Shammai, but very little. At least 95%. I just made up that number. But just from my own, at least 95% of everything stated in Mishnah is from Hillel or Shammai or their students, meaning the people that come after. And Yochanan ben Zakkai and his students, Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Eliezer, and then Rabbi Akiva, and then his students, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda. These are all Rabbi Shimon. That makes up the vast majority, over 90% of the Mishnah. And now it all makes sense, because if you would have asked, this is all coming from Sinai, so why doesn't the Mishnah quote people before Hillel and Shammai, or quote more people from before Hillel and Shammai? Because they were slaughtered. And so everything that we have is actually coming from the time of Hillel and Shammai, because they revived it. Shammai was, some say, originally a student of Hillel. Shammai was a little younger. And Hillel was the president, and then Shammai became a vice president later. So it's actually all coming from, this is really important to understand Herod, because that now solves all these other mysteries in Judaism. And it helps you understand why the Mishnah is the way it is, and why it seemingly really starts with Hillel and Shammai. And everything's recorded in the name of the schools of Hillel and Shammai. And that's why the only schools that you hear about, although there were others, in that time period is just Hillel and Shammai. Where are all the other schools? Shouldn't there have been like 100 different schools? Well, no, because Herod destroyed them all. And then Hillel came, reestablished his academy, and then Shammai established his academy. We know there were others. There were the Bnei Betera and certain others. But that's why Hillel revived all of that. That's why we really only hear about 2 schools, and everybody comes after Hillel and Shammai. So I think it's important to keep that in mind. The story with Herod ends like this. He allowed Bava ben Buta to live, the one sage that he left alive, although he blinded him. Eventually, he realized that Bava ben Buta is, like a real sage, and so modest, and so circumspect, and so wise, and so humble. And he said, if I would have known how great the Zeire B'Rabbanan Kule, how great all these rabbis are, I would have never killed them. I would have never killed them all. So he regretted killing all the rabbis, Herod. He asked, what should I do now? How can I make up for it? What's my tikkun? Literally, that's the word he used. What's my tikkun for this? And Bava ben Buta told him, Ukiba oro shel olam, you extinguished the light of the world. Why? Because you killed all these sages who were teaching Torah, ki ner mitzvah v'Torah or, because it clearly says in Proverbs, in Mishlei, King Solomon says, Torah is light, Torah or. You killed all the people who teach Torah, you extinguished the light. So what you should do now, what should you do? Yelech v'yasok be'oro shel olam. Go and bring back more light into the world. What's that light? Ishayahu says, v'naharu elav kol hagoyim, that all the people of the world will go to the third temple, will walk by the light. V'naharu elav. So Bava ben Buta tells him the temple is a source of light for the world. If you remember, the temple windows were built going outwards, not inward. Usually windows are built wider on the inside and thinner on the outside to allow more light in. But the temple windows were built thin on the inside and wide on the outside to emphasize that light was coming out of the temple to the world. So he's saying the temple is the light of the world. Go and rebuild the temple. By this point, the second temple was already in disarray. It hadn't been renovated for a long time. It was falling apart. So Herod undertook to rebuild the entire temple mount, to rebuild the entire temple, made it much bigger, made it very beautiful. In fact, the sages say that whoever never saw the temple, Herod's temple, never saw a beautiful building. You don't know what good architecture is if you haven't seen Herod's temple, because he renovated it top of the line. He made it amazing. And it was the most beautiful building in the world. So he rebuilt, made this beautiful temple. However, being the Roman that he was, he put prominently Roman eagles in front of it. The eagle was a symbol of the Roman Empire, or one of them. He put Roman eagles in front, and Josephus describes this, and Josephus says not only did he put eagles in front, he decorated it inside like a Roman temple, which was completely not allowed, right? Total heresy. And so Josephus describes this, both our sources and Josephus goes in detail and says the rabbis were against it, and they kept inspiring their students to fight it and to topple the eagles, and Herod would arrest the young students, yeshiva kids who were toppling the statues. And it was like a whole struggle. This was one of the struggles that the Jews had to fight with Herod about. And this is also why, by the way, the temple was destroyed. Herod's temple was destroyed because it had this pagan imagery in it as well. You know, Christians like to say the temple was destroyed because Jews rejected Jesus. But that's not, we've discussed this before. It just talks about this in Masechet Yoma, that Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, even before Jesus, was already going around saying this temple will be destroyed. It's a corrupt temple. It's a shell of what it used to. Yes, it's more physically more beautiful, but spiritually, it's corrupt and dead. This temple will be destroyed. This is Herod's temple, Herod's temple will be destroyed. Herod is this Edomite, right? He is Edom, and he built this temple. So those last few decades of the temple, those last 70, 80 years, this was Herod's temple, and it was a corrupt temple. And the high priest was corrupt. And our own rabbis say this, that the high priest would change every year because they were just no good. So that's why the temple had to be destroyed. Actually, nothing to do with Jesus. Just the temple was already, at this point, too Romanized and too corrupt. And when Herod died, he died of a terrible illness. It was incredibly painful. He even wanted to commit suicide because it was so painful. So he suffered quite a bit. He died, according to Megillat Ta'anit, which is a little-known tractate that goes into minor holidays, Jewish holidays. Megillat Ta'anit actually says that he died on the 7th of Kislev, which is coming up real soon, and that's a minor holiday. It's a little Yom Tov. Yeah. So 2,000 years ago, this was actually a holiday. Megillat Ta'anit records holidays that they used to keep, that the Jews used to keep back then. And the 7th of Kislev, the day, Yom Shemet Hurdus, that was the day, that was a little holiday, because everybody was so happy that he was finally...
I was going to say, that might line up with the day, the 70th day that you're just talking about.
It might, yeah, so it actually is very close to the 70th day. The 70th day from the start this year will be December 6th. And the 7th of Kislev, if I remember correctly, will be December 8th, just a couple of days afterwards.
Nice.
Yeah. So, yeah, the Herodium. There's a big compound in Israel. In fact, Israeli archaeologists in 2007, they claimed that they discovered his tomb. Many people disputed that. It's a bit controversial.
This is all in Jesus' time, right?
Yeah, so Herod in Christianity is the one that was responsible for the massacre of the innocents, that he tried to kill all the babies. He was trying to get rid of Jesus, like the Moses story, but with Jesus. There's no historical evidence that he executed any babies. Yes, he was cruel, but there's no, outside of the New Testament, there's no historical evidence that there was ever a massacre of the innocents. Right. There is another version of Megillat Ta'anit that says the 2nd of Shvat, or the 2nd of Shvat is also listed as the day Hurdus died, but I think actually it says that it's the day Yanai died, that another wicked king, Alexander Yanai, died on the 2nd of Shvat. So in case somebody points out, what about the 2nd of Shvat? Isn't that where that should be? Yanai died on the 2nd of Shvat, which was also a minor holiday because Yanai was also a tyrant. And the 7th of Kislev is when Hurdus died. I'll finish on a positive note. The silver lining. The midrash says that when the temple was destroyed, that Titus appointed 4 of his generals to destroy the entire temple mount compound, which meant the 4 retaining walls, north, south, east, west. He wanted to destroy all 4 walls and completely break the temple mount compound. And so one of the generals did not destroy his wall. And that wall was the western wall. The western retaining wall of King Herod's Temple Mount was not destroyed. And when Titus asked him, why didn't you destroy my wall? He says, no, I did it for you. Because if we all destroy all the walls and there's nothing left, nobody will know what you did here. But I left this one wall so that people will know that Titus and Vespasian destroyed this great temple. This wall will be a memory that we were here and we did this. So Titus was happy with that and said, okay. But the midrash says what really happened, God did that. Specifically, he orchestrated it. Why? Because v'gazu min shmaya, because it was decreed from heaven, the lo yichrav leolam, that wall will never be destroyed. Why? Because sheshchina b'ma'arav, because the Shechina, the divine presence, was there and it rested there when the temple was destroyed, or even before perhaps, when the temple had become corrupt. And we know that in those last decades, the temple services weren't done right, the chut shani wouldn't turn white anymore, and so on. But once the divine presence left the temple, it took refuge just outside in the western wall. The divine presence was there, the Shechina, and so it would never be destroyed. And it's a beautiful midrash, because this was 1,500 years old, at least, this midrash. It's an Eicha Rabbah. And Midrash Rabbah is at least 1,500 years old, and it gives you a promise that the western wall will never be destroyed because the Shechina is there. And that's why this is considered a holy site for us, why Jews pray at the western wall. We're not praying to the wall, obviously, but praying towards a wall is a Torah thing. It goes back to Hezekiah. Hezekiah prayed up against the wall. Jews would pray against the wall because that means you're not praying to anybody. If you pray outside and there's a mountain in front of you, somebody might think you're praying to the mountain, like pagans used to do. If you're praying in front of a tree, people will think you're praying to the tree, like pagans would do. So if you're praying and there's a statue in front of you, or a picture, or a portrait, or something, people might think that you're praying to that thing. So historically, it was customary, and to this day, people do it, and I do. You try to pray in front of a blank wall, because that means that you're not praying to anybody, but just to God, and nobody from around you will have the wrong idea. So the idea of praying at the wall, it is a Jewish thing to pray at a wall, because that means you're praying to God, not to the wall. But the Western Wall in particular has the Shekhinah in it, and the midrash says it will never be destroyed. And it's amazing to think that in the past 2,000 years, Jerusalem has switched hands so many times. There have been so many wars there. So many different empires came and went, and the Romans and the Byzantines and the Arabs and the Mamluks and the Seljuks and the Ottomans and Saladin and the Crusaders, and Israel fought the Jordanians, and there was bombing over them, and it was not destroyed. So it's an amazing prophecy. And to this day, if you go to the Western Wall, the first 7 layers of rock is actually Herodian stones. If you're touching the first 7 layers, you're touching stones from Herod's time.
There's ones underneath too.
And it goes down underneath many, many more rows. Actually, most of it is actually underground. Most of Herod's wall is underground, and the first 7 layers, the big stones. And then above that, you have layers from the Mamluks and from the Ottomans and even from the state of Israel that made repairs at the very top. So I think it's ironic that Herod is probably the reason why, being an Edomite, why that link was formed. The Edom-Rome link was made because of Herod. And there's an irony there that Herod built this temple, expanded the Temple Mount. He was this wicked, cruel, evil tyrant who helped to bring about the Edomite exile. But also today's holiest site happens to be the retaining wall that Herod built. And it's Herodian stones over there. And I think it's all part of the same idea of Edom playing a vital role at the end of days and helping to restore the crown to its former glory. I think there's a message in that too. That Jews are going there, touching this wall, putting notes in that wall, in Herod's wall, really, in this Herodian wall, and this Edomite wall. But it's all part of the same symbolism, I think, that Edom's going to play a monumental role at the end of days to help restore the temple and the Ark of the Covenant and to bring us all there. Because at the end of the day, remember Yeshayahu says the third temple will be Ki beiti beit tefillah ikareh lechol ha'amim. My temple, the third temple, the final temple at the end of days, Isaiah says, will be for all the nations. It'll be an international house of God. So hopefully we'll see that day very soon. We'll pause here and we'll do the rest next time. We still need to talk about the third Rome a little bit. Magog, who is Gog? Who is Magog? Is that an Edomite? Is Gog from Edom? And what is the role of Edom in the end of days? And Ovadiah's prophecy of Edom. What does Obadiah actually say, this Edomite prophet, that should happen to Edom at the end of days? So we'll leave that for next time.